Good morning. Today we look at Matthew chapter 26, verses 1 through 25. Tomorrow morning I'll be on roughly about 8:30. Got an appointment in Jamestown about 10 o'clock. We need to be there, so a little early tomorrow morning, but it'll, as normal, it'll be available all the time. Chapter 26 begins with after Jesus has finished teaching what he's been teaching, what we were talking about yesterday, he gathers his disciples again together and says to them, you know that after 2 days is the Passover. And it's just, of course they knew that it was a Passover. They were gathered in Jerusalem for the Passover festival. So that wasn't a big news event for them to be informed of, but it was Jesus' way of reminding them that Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. It's just, they've been knowing this. Jesus has told them this, and yet, to hear it again, it's kind of been such a hard thing to hear. And also, it just, how would they make sense of it? All the people are clamoring around Jesus. They're eagerly listening. And yeah, granted, they're witnessing the friction that the Pharisees and the scribes bring, the questions and that wondering and all that. But, it's, the disciples have got to wonder, well, how can this be? It just doesn't seem like it's that bad yet. Well, and after the Pharisees and the disciples have gone and Jesus has been teaching them, about how hard it is to get to heaven and everything, they go away, these religious leaders, and they plot, it says. The chief priests and the elders gathered at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. By stealth. That's sneaky. They didn't want to do it in front of the public. They had to figure out a way to do it, and get the public against Jesus. And they did that. And I think about, so much of what goes on in our world today. There's this, stealth. And stealth, all of the underpinnings and all of the workings to discredit somebody. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a political figure or a sports figure or whatever it is. There's stuff going on to undermine just about anybody and everybody, it seems. It doesn't matter who you look at. I'm thinking about, our president. I'm thinking about our sports stars. I'm thinking about, women's basketball, men's football. It doesn't matter. People are trying to undercut others, trying to figure out a way to make them look small or to do, whatever it might be. But these chief priests and scribes were smart enough to know that, if they did it now during the height of this festival, when Jesus, he's just ridden into town on this donkey, and the people have cheered, Hosanna, Hosanna to the Son of David. They're just, excited for Jesus. And so they got to figure out a way somehow, this stealth is coming in again to turn the people against Jesus. But they don't really, the intent probably isn't really to do it right at this festival. But opportunity arises. As we're going to learn, as in verse 6, so Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper. Often when he was in Bethany, he would stay with Lazarus and Mary and Martha, his three really good companions. And, he'd raised Lazarus from the dead, but here he's at the house of Simon the leper. And this isn't Simon Peter. This is a different Simon, of which really this is the only notation about this person. But he's at this house, and the way Matthew tells this story, a woman comes, and other Gospels, well, it's Mary that comes, and it's at the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. So there's discrepancies in the Gospels, which isn't out of the ordinary. But this woman comes, and she says an alabaster jar of very costly ointment, and she pours it on his head and anoints him. and the other gospel, it's a foot washing. So it's possible that it's two different scenarios that happen. But the disciples, it says the disciples, all of the disciples were angry. Why is this waste? That we could have used that, to have helped a lot of poor people. I mean, they're hearing some of Jesus' message, to watch out for the widows and the orphans and the poor, and to take care, to share, and not be wasteful, to be frugal. And these are lessons that we want to teach our children, to use things properly and to not waste. And out here in my wood shop, yesterday I went through some of my cutoffs, scrap lumber that, I save. I don't like to just put things into burn pails and stuff, but, it gets to a point where, you're just kind of overflowing. And it's, some of those things it's really difficult to find a use for. But, so you can't always use everything, and there comes a time to use it for a different purpose. And so Jesus says, this oil, it could have done that. This woman used it for a good purpose. She prepared me. She anointed my body for burial. And again, this reference to Jesus' death. And it just kind of doesn't make sense to the disciples. And it wouldn't make sense to me if I was there either. I mean, we know the history. We know what happened and what happens. But, the disciples were still just kind of, what are you talking about? Anyway, and he praises this woman. This is, he says, truly, whatever good news is proclaimed, this woman will be remembered. Wherever the good news is proclaimed, wherever the word of Jesus is. So this Matthew's got this written down so that when we hear the story of Jesus, we hear this story. And this woman is remembered for her act of grace, her selfless act of giving to Jesus. I mean, this woman could have sold that jar of ointment and, set herself up nicely, for whatever. Or, maybe she was wealthy enough to afford to purchase it. I mean, who knows if she had made it, but, she used it for godly good. Let's put it that way. And then we come to the critical point. One of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, what will you give me if I betray Jesus to you? And it says they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And these pieces of silver were shekels. They were worth about 4 denarii apiece. So 30 pieces of silver, 30 shekels, would be about a third of a year's wage, which is a sizable sum, And it doesn't matter if you were talking about the daily wage then or if you're talking about the daily wage now. I mean, it's a sizable sum of money that they gave to Judas. And it says he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. And then we go now to the first day of unleavened bread. The disciples asked, where shall we celebrate or observe the Passover meal? And he tells them to go to a certain man. This man isn't named, just a certain man. And I will have my Passover at your house. So they did that. And this ends up being that upper room that, is referred to in other places that Jesus returns to later after his resurrection. But while it was evening, in verse 20, he took his place with the 12. And while they were eating, he again said, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. Now Judas has already gone out and taken, and conspired with the religious leaders. He's already taken the 30 pieces of silver, so Jesus knows. So he knows who it is and what's going on. And they begin to get greatly distressed. And they ask, surely not I, Lord, surely not I. And, Jesus evidently doesn't say, no, it's not you, but he says, the one who has dipped his hand in the bowl with me will betray me. And then, it's woe to this man. It would be better off if this person hadn't been born. And then Judas, it says, who betrayed him, asked, surely not I, Rabbi. And Jesus replies, you have said so. And that's where we end our reading for today. But Jesus knew. And in this short passage we looked at today, he referenced his death, his crucifixion to the disciples a couple times. And to think about the reality for Jesus of knowing what's going to happen. I mean, you and I are so fortunate. We don't know when the day of our death is going to be. We may, when people get really ill, I mean, we can see that, the end of life is coming and that. But, Jesus is a young, healthy man, and he knows what's impending, what's coming up. And yet he takes time to be gracious with his disciples and to spend time with them and to try to encourage them for what is to come later.